Let's jump out to the D&M Leasing Hotline. Keep a little round ball conversation going. Welcome to the program, making her Fan After Dark debut. She is the creator of the Trading Post, and she is a collaborator with Bleacher Report and quite prolific on X, Twitter, or whatever the hell we're calling it these days. Miss Lauren Gunn. Lauren, how are you on this Haiku Hump Day Wednesday?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me. It's an interesting time in Mavs world, so I'm happy to be talking all things Mavs.
Yeah, Lauren, welcome to the program. It's nice to be speaking with you. We've been seeing your stuff on social, so it's nice to get you on the show and hear your insight about what you think the Dallas Mavericks are doing, and we'll jump right into it. We just talked about it last segment. Bovada coming out with Herb Jones being the Dallas Mavericks being the landing favorite to get him. We're hearing Mark Stein talk about they're not trying to move him. What are you hearing? What do you think is kind of the smoke around the Herb Jones moving and Herb Jones to the Mavericks?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because anytime you're mentioned as the betting favorite, at least something has got to be coming from somewhere. And so it's difficult to always pinpoint what's behind betting odds. But what's interesting is that when you've got a team like New Orleans who is injury riddled this season and they're obviously not performing very well, and they also have their own draft pick this year, while also having a bunch of young wings on their roster, but trying to put a formula together to compete. They're in this weird sort of can't quite figure it out area. And so this last offseason, a lot of the conversation was about Brandon Ingram and his future. And now he's hurt. He's trying to figure out what his future looks like. They just committed a bunch of money to Trey Murphy. Jordan Hawkins, who they drafted last year, looks like to be at least an intriguing young prospect. So where does that leave Herb Jones? And so I think it's a really interesting conversation to have, because up until this point, a lot of the conversation has been about Cam Johnson, and now Herb Jones jumps into this picture of who's available on the trade market, I don't want to say he's available for a cheaper price, because I don't think that's the case, but New Orleans has found themselves in this area where they're able to field all of these offers because they have players to replace him if they do move him. But I also don't believe that they need to move him. So I only think that they will move Herb Jones if somebody comes in with a whopping offer, which I think Dallas could do. Will they is another question.
Well, you just laid down maybe the best segue I've heard in quite some time. So, and you mentioned as well that, look, you don't think Daniel Gafford has to be a piece to be included in this. And, of course, we're huge fans of Daniel Gafford here on the Fan After Dark. What makes you say that you don't think Gafford would have to be a part of that deal?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, everyone knows that New Orleans needs front court help. So, of course, I'm sure they would kick the tires, at least on Daniel Gafford. But part of the reason that I don't see a world in which he would be included is because I think Nico and the way he's constructed the roster and the team is a big believer in this sort of too big philosophy that they've been implementing and all of the success that they've had with it, and the fact that they've been able to do damage in the playoffs with it. And so I think they're going to be very hesitant to break that up. And with New Orleans specifically, I don't think that they need to go out and trade or necessarily trade Herb Jones to try and get that big. If they want to go get a big, there are plenty of bigs out there at all different dollar amounts, all different prices that they could go get without having to include Herb Jones. So to me, if you're going to make a deal for Herb, you're going to put your best package available. It doesn't just have to be the clear, most obvious fit for what New Orleans needs. But that also has to be a package that works for Dallas. And for me, I can't see a world in which they say, hey, yes, Herb Jones would be a huge upgrade. He's an all-defensive player that you can sort of continue to establish this elite defense with, but not at the sake of tearing down part of the identity that we've already built. And so in my mind, Dallas has matching salary. They've got 2 tradable firsts. They also have a third first-round pick, the 2026 pick that they could trade as a swap. And to me, I think I'm a believer that if anybody saw a Twitter notification right now that said the Mavericks traded 2 first-round picks, matching salary, and a pick swap for Herb Jones, I think Mavs Twitter would be in an uproar saying that that's a crazy overpay. But so I think Dallas has options. I didn't even mention Jaden Hardy and Omax as potential assets to also add to a deal. I think they have enough to get a deal done, but I just don't think New Orleans is necessarily in enough of a hurry to need to move him.
And Lauren, you kind of go right into what I was going to ask. Obviously, we see a lot of stuff on Twitter with you doing different trades and people you think the Mavericks should acquire. What would be the perfect trade for you where you think New Orleans is happy and accepts that deal and the Dallas Mavericks get what they want and getting Herb Jones without giving away a Daniel Gafford, a long-term piece?
Yeah, it's really tough because in my mind, it would have to be something where Maxey is the primary salary in there to get you close to that Herb Jones $13 million contract. And you're going to have to add, because of the situation and New Orleans seemingly having all of the leverage with Herb Jones specifically, understanding that he's a piece that can potentially push you over the edge as a contender. I think the price is going to be high, so I think you would have to include at least 2 first-round picks for that. That's where I think things could get a little, well, if we're not trading for a star, if we're trading for who would be coming off of our bench, do we really want to give up 2 first-round picks? Maybe, maybe not. I think at the bare minimum, you would have Maxey as the matching salary, 2 first-round picks involved, and 1 of Jaden Hardy and Omax.
Okay.
I think that's the bare minimum.
So, Lauren, say that trade happens in a perfect world, and now those guys are gone, your first-round picks are gone, and you have him on your team, Herb Jones. What does the rotation and lineup look? Does he come off the bench for you still? Does Clay move? How do you think that all works out if you were to have Herb Jones on your team?
Yeah, I think that's where the interesting conversation starts, because right now, obviously, we're seeing Clay struggle. And a big part of bringing Clay in was having him maximize on the gravity that Luka and Kyrie will pull. And that is obviously still the case. We've seen him put together some good performances and some maybe not so great performances. Yeah. But another piece to his success, I believe, and I think many others believe, is how he will continue to play and feed off of Derek Lively, who does do such a phenomenal job of finding the open guy when he catches the ball in the middle of the floor. So to me, it's essential right now that Clay stays in the starting lineup, but Clay signed on a long-term deal. So if he's not available, if he doesn't quite, get it together on the consistent level that Dallas needs, I absolutely think that in the long term, you could see him maybe slide into a 6-man role and start someone like Herb Jones, who's not just an elite defensive player. Like I said, he's the type that builds a defensive identity. So I think that gives Dallas flexibility. I think having a starter or a guy that plays significant bench minutes in Herb Jones, only making less than $15 million, is a huge plus, which is where you might see the willingness to include such a high amount of draft compensation there. So I think it gives you flexibility all around, and that is why another big reason, unfortunately, why I think New Orleans has a lot of leverage here with Herb specifically.
Lauren Gunn, creator of the Trading Post and collaborator with Bleacher Report, joining us here on the D&M Leasing Hotline. And here, okay, so this happens today, and it kind of, it's kind of been a slow sports day, right? I mean, outside of, if you're into 70-year-old coaches taking over Division I programs. But how much of this do you think, especially when you see the whole Bovada putting the Mavericks in as the favorite, the quote-unquote betting favorite to land this Herb Jones, and we hadn't heard anything about this prior to today, at least, from a national standpoint, is on the heels of yesterday's basketball game, right, where your star doesn't look great. You got no P.J. Washington, and let's call it what it is. That team did not look like the finals team from a year ago. Do you think that we're kind of prisoners of the moment right now, and maybe that kind of got things juiced up a little bit and made it a little more interesting than if they'd have won last night?
Yeah, I'm sure you could say that a little bit, especially, I mean, it's an NBA Cup game. There's a lot of eyes, arguably should have been more. If you saw Jason Gallagher's tweet about putting eyes on the OKC Mavs rivalry. But I think when you're the leader of a betting odds, like that always kind of makes my head turn, because I think if anyone would have who would you put at the top of the betting odds for someone like Herb Jones? I would have guessed Memphis.
Okay.
That's what I.
Well, they got them at 2.
So they do have them at 2, but I think if you would have asked a general or canvassed a bunch of general NBA fans, that they would have not have said Mavs within their top 10 answers. Right. And so I think that's the type of thing that would give me a little bit of pause of like, where is that coming from? And so you always have to take everything with a grain of salt, especially betting odds. And then obviously you see the report from Mark Stein, very reliable source, saying that New Orleans is not in any hurry. I think that makes a lot of sense, but people say things all the time. I don't doubt that's a credible report, but people say things all the time to either drive up the price, to incite a bidding war. You just have to keep an eye on it is all I would say there.
Lauren, I got a 1,000 questions to ask you, but I'll save it with just a couple right here to get you out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another player outside of Herb do you think the Dallas Mavericks should be or are interested in getting? And then how aggressive do you think Nico's going to be in these next couple months?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I think number one should be Cam Johnson, but I do think that it's going to be very difficult to get someone like him. This could be a hot take, but I actually think if Herb Jones were to get traded, the price paid for Herb Jones would be higher than Cam Johnson, which I think some people think sounds crazy. I don't think it sounds crazy.
Nope.
I think it's a game of leverage. Everyone is standing around like hawks circling Brooklyn right now, along with obviously Washington and some other teams. But I think when you look at Cam Johnson, he's kind of the best name looking at how he could fit on just about any contender, the dollar amount. He's definitely a guy that could absolutely come off the bench and then turn into that full-time starter. And then you have Clay in that six-man role. But trading for someone like Cam Johnson would require a lot of guys moved just to get the salary to match. So I think there's some very evident hurdles there. So to me, the kind of middle ground, interesting name that I think is really one to watch, given the history, two different conferences. There's a lot of reasons why I could see a trade going through, is Obi Toppin of the Indiana Pacers.
Yep.
They have reason to move him. I think he would be a really underrated fit. The thing that gives me pause there is if you trade for a 4, obviously you're not trading Omax to a team that's trying to solve their role logjam with a 4. So if you trade for a 4, are you sort of giving up on the development of Omax because you already have Najee Marshall? And there's a real question there. So to me, that's going to be the interesting thing that I'm watching at the deadline, because I think if you have to push all your chips in for someone like Cam Johnson, Omax is probably going out the door. But if you trade for someone like Obi Toppin, I don't know that he would be included in that deal. So a lot to watch there, a lot of kind of under the radar moving pieces to deals like that.
Lauren, I'll tell you what, you've been phenomenal. What is the Trading Post? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the Trading Post is sort of a condensed version of things that I read, things that I hear from time to time, just kind of looking at different windows of time throughout the NBA calendar leading up to certain transaction cycles, where you look at a player who maybe was playing a lot last year, I'll give you an example right here, a guy that was in the early conversation for Sixth Man of the Year with the Orlando Magic and Cole Anthony, and has a significantly reduced role this year and now looks to be available for pennies on the dollar, who I'm a big believer that any team that goes in there and scoops him up, looking at Orlando just paying Jalen Suggs and wanting to find minutes for Anthony Black, you're going to get a gem, just like Charlotte did with Trey Mann. So I am trying to highlight those situations by looking at the sort of trends, looking at teams that are more likely to trade with certain front offices and a lot less likely to trade with others, and kind of just laying that all out in a condensed version so fans of different teams can see who their team might be trading for next.